Busy time of the year for everyone, so I appreciate everyone being here. This is fantastic. We are going to be on kind of a fast schedule again today. I hope that's okay. We're not going to cut anything short, but we're going to move very steadily through. And we'd like to start off with introducing folks so we kind of know who's here and what role everyone plays. Start with you, Lynn. You've got the microphone, and we'll just come around the table. Okay.
Go around the table.
Whichever way is fine.
Let's start with that.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Shannon Followell. I'm from Texas Tech University, and I'm part of the Financial Aid Audit Compliance Professionals Group that will be presenting later this afternoon.
Good morning. I'm Chrisanna Black with the University of North Texas, also part of the Financial Aid and Compliance Professionals Group that will be speaking later.
Good morning. My name is Tanya Vitito. I'm with UT Arlington. I'm also with the Compliance Group.
Elizabeth Butoff with ICUT. Carol McDonald with ICUT.
Arturo Alonso, Coordinating Board.
Alan Pixley, Collin College.
Leslie Helmkamp with the Center for Public Policy Priorities.
Jeff Webster, TG.
David Young with the Governor's Office.
Liz Bolin, UNT System.
Kevin King, State Representative Celia Israel's office.
Steve Johnson, Texas Association of Community Colleges.
Davenport, Loan Program Representative.
Michelle Williams, Program Manager, Loan Program Operations.
I'm Albert Contreras with the Loan Program.
Jenny Miramontes with the Loan Program also.
Anna?
I'm Anna Drake. I'm a student rep from UT Austin, Doc Student in Higher Ed Policy.
I'm Doris Constantine, Associate Vice President for Student Financial Services at St. Edward's University.
George Torres with Texas Guaranteed.
Carolyn Jones, Collin College.
I'm Jane Caldwell, Director of Grants and Special Programs at the Coordinating Board.
Lisa Mahler, I'm Interim Assistant Commissioner for Financial Aid Programs at the Coordinating Board.
Marcus Wilson, Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center.
Tom Malecki, University of Texas at Austin.
I'm Selma DeLeon, University of North Texas. I'm Mary Teal. I'm here for Joe Pettibon. I'm from Texas A&M Scholarships and Financial Aid.
Good morning. Terry Bazan, Executive Director of Student Assistance at Austin Community College.
Good morning. Sofia Rodriguez with the Coordinating Board Grants and Special Programs.
And Lynn Kenyon with the Coordinating Board Grants and Special Programs.
Once again, thank you very much for being here. It's helpful to kind of know who's in the audience. We've got some experts out there, so as questions come up that we can't answer, we know who to point to. So again, thank you for being here. First order of business is to, okay, and where do we do that?
That should have done it when they came in.
Okay, did everyone sign in out in the lobby when you came in? If not, please do so before you leave today. Harold, would you like to introduce yourself? Excellent, and welcome. First order of business is our minutes. Those were sent out, I believe, email a few weeks ago. Were there any changes, corrections, updates that needed to be made to those?
There were grammatical errors that I marked and gave.
And we will update them and send them back out to the group.
Okay. So can we approve them in that edited format, or do we need to wait?
These were not substantive changes. If the committee is comfortable with that, I would think we could.
If the changes are merely grammatic, does anybody have a problem with that? Okay. Any other changes? Okay. Minutes are approved. First order of business then after that is going to be the discussion of the Be On Time forgiveness and default rates, and that's going to go to Lisa.
Yes, and first I'd like to provide a little context. The Sunset Advisory Commission made some recommendations for the Be On Time loan program that resulted in language in the Senate Bill 215 that is also mirrored in the administrative rules for the program. And if you go to the handout that says 21.135 Program Support Activities, those are the proposed rules that were proposed at the April board meeting for final consideration at the July board meeting. And you will see that and then another handout has sunset review at the upper left-hand corner. What the issue was, at the time the sunset staff were looking at the loan program, they determined that the program was, not that the funds were not being spent as much as they should have been, and the forgiveness rates were not what they should have been. So there were recommendations, again, that ended up in legislation as well as the rules, and that's the background, for this discussion. And before we do begin the discussion, I'd like you to know that the questions we're asking you to consider, or the things where we need your input. Number one, what is the most appropriate method for calculating the be-on-time default rate? Number two, what is the most appropriate method for calculating the be-on-time forgiveness rate? When should the affected institutions implement be-on-time counseling, which has to be in person or online? Should it be January of 2015? That's something that staff had thought might be a reasonable period of time, but that's something I'd like input from, we would like input from you on. How do you envision fulfilling the requirements of 21.135B, which is the rule that you have? And how would you document compliance, and how would the coordinating board confirm compliance? Would annual reporting be needed? So, if you go to the rule that talks about the default rates, really it does not specify how they should be calculated. And I'd like for Albert Contreras to present to you some possible scenarios or possible methods of calculating the default rates. Yeah.
Good morning. Basically, in your handouts, we've just, for purposes of at least beginning the discussion, laid out three possible potential methods for calculating both the default rate and the forgiveness rate. The coordinating board, we historically always look at inception to date, the historical information. So within each classification, default and forgiveness, we do have a calculation basically that goes back to the beginning of time, whether your institution actually began awarding beyond time in its first year in 2003 or more recently, but it is historical. And then there's another calculation that's kind of based on what everyone's more accustomed to seeing probably, and that's based on the federal cohort type calculation. Now, we know that the feds are moving in. We don't keep up with that. We don't handle Fed loans, but I believe they've moved into a 3-year cohort from a 2-year. And we've just listed some basic calculations for both the 3-year cohort and the 2-year cohort, listing the both default and forgiveness rates. And at the bottom of the second page, you'll see what we've come up with under each of those three calculations for both classifications, both categories, default and forgiveness, statewide averages. So at least to begin the discussion, we just lay that out for your comments, recommendations, considerations.
So basically the institutions, each institution that has a default rate that exceeds the statewide average default rate, and each institution that has a loan forgiveness rate that is less than 50% of the statewide average for forgiveness, those institutions must implement the be-on-time counseling provisions.
I'm sorry, what you just said about is that on a piece of paper?
That's on the piece of paper that's 21.135, program support activities, go down to C, notwithstanding subsection B4 of this section, the following eligible institutions shall provide the loan repayment and default prevention counseling described. Okay. Sure. Now, this other handout, I know you're kind of overwhelmed with handouts, but the one that says Sunset Review at the top does provide information on other things the coordinating board is doing, to make sure that beyond time students are aware of the forgiveness provisions. Semi-annual letters go out to them reminding them these are the requirements. Also, insofar as making sure that students are aware of the loan availability, those who received prior awards are receiving annual letters, reminding them to request a renewal beyond time loan. But again, we haven't prescribed exact methods for institutions to do the counseling. The rule simply mirrors the statute, and we'd like to hear from you on any guidelines that the institutions would want us to provide, any ideas you have for how you will implement those counseling, or how schools that must provide the counseling could possibly do that. Should it be, at the time the person obtains the loan? I'm just looking to you for input on that.
This is not a shy group normally.
This is perhaps on a little bit different tack, but when I look at the program support activities, I don't see anything about the default prevention efforts that the board would engage in. What does the board do now if a borrower becomes delinquent in the repayment of their beyond time loan?
Well, there's a very rigorous due diligence system that's in place for all of our loans, including beyond time. Telephone calls every, and you'll have to. I may look to the Janie because I haven't been in the day-to-day activities for a while for the loan program, but every 10 days, there's some sort of notice. There are phone calls. Am I right? Is it more rigorous than is required for the federal loans?
We contact them about every 10 days.
And when you reach out to students regarding to the forgiveness requirements, is it by email?
Yes. Emails?
Yes, we are right now doing the majority of them by email.
So
have the collection or the default prevention techniques you're using been in place since the beginning of the Beyond Time program?
Yes.
Okay.
One of my thoughts is, looking at what you've suggested, is the private institutions were being phased out, and the forgiveness rate is higher and default rate is low, so that could have an implication every year on changing the baseline. And, you might want to reconsider.
Well, they're really not being phased out. There's general revenue appropriation for the private institutions. I don't have a sense of I don't have the allocation with me or anything for the upcoming year, but I think the participation has been very good with the private institutions.
Maybe I misunderstood, but I thought that private institutions were being phased out when our...
No, it's just...
Perhaps?
You're thinking about...
2-year institutions?
No. I'm very sorry. I thought we were. It was like, don't give any funds to any new borrowers. I'm sorry. I misinformed. So.
Now,
Looks like she wanted to retire.
I think what's happened is over the last couple of legislative sessions, as funds have become a little more limited, the word may be coming out of our offices. Do you have enough for renewals and possibly a few new awards? But that's more of funding. But there has been funding.
I did not know that.
So
there was definitely a time when we were told that we were being phased out, but no, sorry. I'm not sure.
One point I'd like to make about educating students regarding the eligibility requirements for forgiveness. Improving student participation. Forgive me, it's A1. I would suggest that there might be some value to, and Albert and I have traded some emails on this, to the board also engaging in some efforts to notify students who are potential renewal borrowers for Beyond Time that they should go ahead and contact their financial aid office to ensure that they that they request to be on time for the upcoming academic year. Many of us are somewhat hemmed in by some of the federal gag rules on Beyond Time and other quote-unquote private loans, which drives me nuts that this is considered a private loan. But and so, quite frankly, since I think this corresponds with the state rules, but we certainly considered our first obligation to try to continue to fund with Beyond Time students that have had Beyond Time before.
Right, and in fact, that was an excellent suggestion that we took to heart, and that's one of the points here, that in June of 2011, we began mailing letters each semester to prior, actually by email, to prior borrowers, asking them to do that.
And, you know, it could be helpful if you would do that even before June. Quite frankly, the earlier, what we at least try to do, and I guess other folks may have a little different approach to this, but we try to give those renewal borrowers a reasonable period of time after you folks would reach out and contact them to contact us and request a renewal of their Beyond Time. At which point then we start packaging Beyond Times for renewals and see how much we're going to have left for new borrowers. And we want to try to get those awards out to new borrowers as early as possible. And, you know, in June, if the renewal folks don't get contacted till June, it could well be September or so before we can begin to offer Beyond Time to new borrowers.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we do it in June of every year. I know that's when we began the
It'd be great if it could happen, say, in
when do you normally do it?
March or April.
Early
April.
There was an email that went out through the Grants and Special Programs listserv. I believe it was last Friday, and it was to the institutions, basically warning you that our mass email would be coming in about a week, which we intend to do, if not the end of this week, early next week. We did that, obviously, so that you and your staff are aware.
But it'd be better to do it in February or March.
But, yeah, we kind of looked, I looked at last year's, and maybe it was because of the session, I'm not sure, but last year it didn't even go out, I don't think, till August. So June, we thought we were ahead of it, but by all means, it makes, there's nothing that stops us from doing it any earlier.
And certainly June is far better than August.
Yes.
But, you know, the earlier we might do it, if we could get students to focus on contacting us before they head home at the end of the spring semester, then we can make some decisions about getting them awarded and using what's left for the initial borrowers.
Early March, pre-spring break.
Yeah.
I have
Maybe
a question.
post-spring break.
I have a question. What does OCD and LSD mean?
You're referring to the footnotes at the very bottom?
Well, yeah, no, it's not even footnoted. That's why I'm asking. You're on the top of your default rates, you've got a 3-year cohort, and it says in parentheses OCD 2011, OCD 2012, and then on this side, forgiveness rates, the LSD and the LSD. What does that mean?
Our apologies. They weren't meant to be cryptic. They were more internal notes. Under the default, OCD is the original contract date. In other words, what triggers this group, this cohort group, is when they actually first went into repayment.
Okay.
On the forgiveness side, LSD, and boy, that's not a good choice.
A lot of us already know what LSD is, so that's okay.
That's the left school date. When they actually left school, then that puts them in that cohort group. So again, I apologize for the acronyms. And twice, double apology for the LSD.
Brings back old memories.
Carol, were you going to make a comment? Okay. More questions, more thoughts.
You know, and these three methods are not the only. I mean, these are just ideas. We know you're familiar with the 2-year federal cohort default rate and the 3-year one, but then again, you know, it provides a whole different context to provide from the beginning of your participation in the program information.
If I could make another suggestion, at least to see how other folks feel about this, I see that in Section C, the trigger for students providing or institutions providing their students with information is tied to the statewide average. And I wonder if it might not be more appropriate, given that different institutions have different missions, to tie that to the sector average for the institution. So that, for example, institutions that say might be a little more open in mission don't get caught up in being above the 50% point on C2 and being, exceeding the statewide average on C1, but compare them to the other institutions in their sectors.
I think
I want to raise that, to see how other folks feel about it too.
Well, we can certainly talk to General Counsel about, if we have that flexibility to do. I mean, the statute says statewide average, but it's very possible that the interpretation could
be statewide average within a sector.
And I think Albert has provided the statewide average for each sector right here.
There is by category. There's one for all public, but that includes the health-related institutions as well. But there are subtotals or sub-averages for each group.
And in terms of the which default rate you use, I think there is something to be said for doing something similar to what the federal government does on 3-year rates. And so if I understand the contract date you were referring to, that would be students who have defaulted in 3 years or less past that contract date, which would be the date that they would normally start making payments?
Correct. We've identified in that 3-year cohort group those in anytime during that fiscal year, 2011, which is the 10-11 school year basically, right, who entered repayment, and we've checked them now 3 years later to see where they stand and have come up with those figures.
So it's from the left school date, correct? It's not tied to the contract date.
For purposes of the loan system, to identify them properly, we've selected one data element called the first contract date, which is a fairly constant date, so that they.
But then you're looking at when they go into repayment to determine when they defaulted.
Right. Anyone who from that time frame of 2011 who entered repayment have a first contract date scheduled for repayment. And now 3 years later, we're looking at that group to see where they stand. And it pretty much mirrors the Fed calculation.
I'm sorry, I'm not a loan person, so you need to get, I have another couple of questions. For determining a default rate and the cohort that you're talking about, you're identifying is it the left school date that starts the count of the 3 years? and then you look to see whether they have defaulted in that period of time?
It's for default, we're looking at the original contract date, which means the first time we've scheduled them for repayment.
Oh, okay. So the contract is not the contract to get the loan, but it's a contract to repay the loan.
Exactly, that
Okay.
sets the terms for repayment.
That's a good question because I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And the only reason we didn't use that on the forgiveness side is because it's not always measured in years, so to speak, when they left school, because they can leave school, they can come back, they can take 4 years, they can take 5 years. We've seen them take longer than that and still meet the eligibility criteria for forgiveness. So default was a little easier to pinpoint the data element within the system to identify those. So in one respect, default is the contract date, but forgiveness, it's when they left school.
Albert, in the explanatory notes at the bottom of the second page of the handout that gives the rates, there's a reference to judgments. So, for example, number of students in default plus number of students in judgment.
Yes, sir.
If a student doesn't default, what are the reasons that a judgment might be entered against them?
Well, I think it's more of a distinction within our system that we'll track them past 180 days. At 180 days, they're tagged, if you will, within the system as being in default. As we proceed through the later stages of collection, litigation, judgment, then they kind of fall out of that category and they're picked up in the judgment category. So to be sure we have all students who have defaulted, just merely defaulted, and those that have gone into judgment, they're combined, they're added together.
And when you say gone into judgment, that means the court has entered a judgment.
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's just to capture all who have gone into default, including those that are categorized and maintained and counted separately as in judgment.
Okay.
Is there any objection to going with the 3-year cohort default rate for calculating this?
No.
Anybody have any other thoughts about it?
I just have a question. What do you use? What do you all use, a clearinghouse, or what do you use to manage if people transfer out and go to another institution to keep them out of repayment?
We do report to the clearinghouse and gather data from the clearinghouse. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. It's the only thing I don't want to add wrinkles to it, but I mean, the motivation is to obviously get people to graduate and, get them to meet the criteria of forgiveness. And I wonder if there's any other measurement that should be in there besides GPA, for renewal.
For renewal?
To ensure that the people that are continuing to receive
You mean academic
beyond time.
progress requirements?
Progress.
What are the beyond time academic progress requirements?
I believe for renewals, it's a 2.5, which is realistically below the expected forgiveness level.
Mm-hmm. But I think that, again, that's where the counseling element comes in, and any guidelines that you think that we should write, or any thoughts about how to go about doing the counseling. That was one of the questions we had. We also, do you feel that if beginning in January of 2015 is an appropriate time to begin your counseling if you're in that category? Is that, we thought, well, for fall would be just not enough time to set up procedures for it. But we thought perhaps by January the institutions could begin their counseling activities.
Is that for the upcoming year, like January 2015, and so then it would be for the upcoming year?
Right.
Because this is for new borrowers, right? Or are we doing it for everybody?
Well, I believe for everybody. All right? I mean, the rule.
I don't believe statute distinguishes between renewals and new awards.
So if we fall into that category, then every year we need to do the online that's going to be created, I presume, right, online or in person. We have to do that for every single borrower every year? Is that what we're saying before we can disperse a new loan? Is that the process?
Well, we haven't set forth in rule that it has to be done before. These are the questions to be considered by this committee.
Well, okay.
How should it be done? Should it be left to institutions to develop individual plans for this? We can point to the TG. One of the things that that is mentioned on one of the handouts is that TG has some materials on its website that we're going to put a link on our program webpage to those materials. We're also going to be working with TG staff to perhaps strengthen the forgiveness materials. But nonetheless, we did consult with General Counsel about the coordinating board. The statute says that the institutions shall perform these activities, so we can't just put something on the webpage.
But I think to go back to your question, the when and the hows are part of the discussion. Do you need to do it across all students that you award beyond time to? It would appear statute.
Well, then that would be every year, every single borrower, whether they're renewal or new.
That's what it appears to say.
So we're having to create the default prevention and the online counseling for these students? Is that what we're discussing? Because we have tools available for the Stafford loan borrowers. I'm just saying if we're going to be required to do it, I would hope that either we contract with TG or somebody to come up with an online counseling and not require the institutions, because it could be willy-nilly all over the place. Right. If everybody's doing something different. It would make much more sense if we're going to truly make this the way it needs to be. It really should be everybody needs to use the same program, not every institution creates their own. Okay, that would be my suggestion.
The kind of information we needed to.
And I believe that's allowed for.
Plus, I don't want to write my own. Yeah. So that's.
I believe it's allowed for that the institutions can set up their own or utilize third-party TG resources.
Hi, my name is Leslie Helmkamp. I'm with the Center for Public Policy Priorities. Can you hear me? I'm Leslie Helmkamp with the Center for Public Policy Priorities, and I just wanted to chime in with your comments. We worked with Representative Enchia's office on the amendment, and one of the things that we put into the language is that the coordinating board would, in fact, collaborate with institutions and other organizations to provide the loan counseling. That it would not fall to institutions to create their own loan counseling modules. So that's exactly to your point, that was the intent when we wrote the amendment, that it be a collaboration and it be a consortium, and it wouldn't fall just to the institutions for many of those reasons.
So round of applause.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So, and yes, TG has materials, and those are the things that we talked with Representative Enchia's office about. Is that there are materials that can be provided to the whole. Okay.
And I would suggest that we work with TG on maybe.
And TG wants the materials to be used. I mean, we started working on this probably 2 years ago when it was brought up in a sunset
meeting. Yeah, I think
meeting.
there's like a GPA calculator, but it's not a complete online counseling module.
Right. But it is something that I think the staff that has been working on this has been waiting for this to be implemented so that they can then see, okay, this is how we have to modify whatever it is we've done. Let's talk to the coordinating board. Let's get this up and running so that the schools don't have to create their own program and that it's uniform, standardized across the board. But the intent, our TG's intent is that the materials be used for this program. And if we have to modify them, we have to modify them. As soon as the rules are adopted.
Okay, so let's say we have this online tool that's complete. Would you, require the student to do that? At what point would the student go through that counseling?
Well, I would think that you would want us to do it before disbursement. I'm sorry. Before disbursement is when we have to do it for Stafford loans. So it makes sense that, once we award the student, they've requested to be on time, whether they're renewal or new. Once we award it to them, then we put an entrance counseling requirement out there and then direct them to wherever that online tool is. They complete it, and then that satisfies the requirement, and we're done, and we're ready to disperse. If they don't satisfy it by disbursement, then they don't get their loan until they satisfy it. It's the same thing that we do for Staffords. I would imagine everybody is doing it that way in some form or another.
And I would just like to add, if possible, if it can be in a format that we can upload it into our systems, because that's key in being able to use it.
Could I make one suggestion regarding some of the language in Section B? There are a couple points there that talk about ensuring that students understand certain things and receive certain things. It's difficult to ensure that. Perhaps it can be done, as Lisa suggested, if we do this before the students ever receive their loan funds and make it a condition of them receiving the loans. Having said that, in my experience, that's when students are least attentive to information about things that are going to happen years down the road for them. And that makes it, I think we also have to think in terms of sort of a just-in-time delivery. Deliver this information when it's most meaningful to the borrower. And that makes it difficult to say we can absolutely ensure, and I'd be concerned about how that term might be construed. It might be better to say something like, provide to the students last known address or something like that. Because that, quite frankly, is the standard, again, that I think, as Lisa said, the Federal Direct Loan Program uses.
And maybe there's two things. What Tom is talking about, maybe there needs to be some kind of exit requirement as they're getting ready to graduate. And I hesitate to add a requirement, but if we're truly going to make sure the student understands, listen, first of all, we can let them know if they really are on track to get forgiveness. We can make sure that they know that up front whenever they're getting ready to graduate, and then also the perils of default, especially if some of us have higher default rates, that could help us get that default rate down. So I agree with Tom that we need to give some other kind of information closer to graduation so they realize, hey, I can get this forgiven, and I want to make sure that I don't default. The other thing, we're only requiring this for, and I understand for every single year, for those of us that have higher default rates, it needs to be for every student, but have we thought about requiring this for any new student coming in, regardless of an institution's default rate, so that they're given appropriate information up front, pretty much like the direct loan program. I know that adds a requirement for institutions that have lower default rates, but if we're truly going to notify students and make sure that they're informed, that may be something to consider, that every new borrower goes through it, and then for institutions that have the higher default rate, every year they go through it. Something to think about.
Just a real quick reminder, if those folks listening in want to send in an email comment or question, the address is fameeting@thecb.state.tx.us, and Lynn is monitoring that. So.
And Tom, I believe the language that's in the rule is identical to the statutory language, but I'm sure that we could consider proposing a rule that would reword, not say ensure.
Or define ensure as in where you send it or how you provide it, to what email address, to what physical address, things like that. Does the COBORD have a call center that students who are having difficulty making payments can contact? That's probably going to be one of the loan default prevention strategies, but and it probably doesn't rise to the level of something that would be put in the rule, but it would seem to me that making sure that students have that number.
Well, our customer call center is on the phone number is on all our materials. We have a call center, and then again, I think sending semi-annual emails to borrowers reminding them of the requirements for forgiveness has been a really good thing to do.
I had a question. You mail letters in June and December. Would it not be better for students to get those letters while because usually by June, most of the students have, gone to their summer job or whatever, so they're not right there on hand to be able to ask questions.
Sure, we can change the timing of that.
That might help, at least help us be able to contact the students to give them the information.
And when do students typically leave campus? Isn't it pretty
Usually
early
mid-May.
May? Okay. So late April might be better than May.
Maybe
if
even
that's
late
feasible.
April, late November, just so they get it before the end of the semester, and that way they're on campus to ask questions.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Excellent.
Is the decision three-year cohort default rate?
So 3-year default rate's okay? Do you want a motion on that, or just a nod of heads? Not a nodding off. I'm going to assume you'll take all this information, kind of pull it together and share back again?
Sure.
Okay. Outstanding.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. So the loan program staff are going to be sending these semi-annual letters to students, and that's to all be on-time borrowers, right? Why then Part C2 about certain institutions having to provide having to provide students with loan repayment and default prevention counseling? Could that also be put into could something about that be put into these letters?
I'm not sure I followed your question.
The letters, it seems to me if the letters are going out to all the borrowers twice a year, and if we have institutions that have less than a 50% forgiveness rate, less than the 50% of the statewide average, couldn't those letters be enhanced for their be-on-time borrowers and come from the party that will be collecting the be-on-time loan from the student and the party that the student has the contractual relationship with?
Well, we certainly could share the letters with the institutions that have the low forgiveness rates. I think pretty much what the letter says is it just reiterates all the specific requirements for having your loan forgiven. But it's certainly, we could share the draft so that institutions could send it out under their own signature. Is that kind of what you had in mind?
No, what I have in mind is the coordinating board sending it out.
But we are sending them out.
What do you want to enhance?
I'm talking about enhancing the semi-annual letter that goes to students at these institutions that don't come within half of the statewide average, to also include some of the loan repayment and default prevention information that the students need.
Because they're being contacted anyway.
Sure, we can include the link to the TG site, for example, in there.
One of the things that I found when I worked in student loans was the more parties that contacted the student borrower, the more confused the student borrower got about who they were supposed to pay attention to. Their contractual relationship is with the coordinating board. And so there may be some value, rather than the institutions reaching out to students with these semi-annual letters, that the coordinating board be the party that reach out to them and include the information that would have been sent by the institution to those students in the semi-annual letters, and not have the institutions be in the business of confusing the students with yet another party heard from.
Excuse me, I think there was still one basic question about being on time that was raised by Doris that maybe should be considered a little bit more, and that was the question of whether the be on time SAP requirements should be raised so that...
I retract my comment.
Okay.
Well, but for clarification.
Okay, well, the fact that to have forgiveness requires a 3.0, but to continue to get the loans is a 2.5, could be misleading to the students. And I recognize that raising the SAP requirement, the GPA requirement, will definitely disable some students from continuing in the program. And there is a benefit in the program of having these students receive a zero interest loan, whether they get it forgiven or not.
Right.
So that's kind of the issue on the table is there any benefit for raising the SAP for be on time? And is GPA the only academic progress requirement?
75%.
Is
of
it
the
also
courses they complete.
75%?
So, yeah, and I would argue that we don't want to raise it because you're right. There is a benefit, even if they aren't getting forgiven. It is a zero interest loan that many of my students need. So,
if you subject a greater percentage of low-income borrowers to losing their 0% interest loan while they're in school, you'll increase the dropout rate among those borrowers, and you'll see your forgiveness rates go down and your default rates rise.
Other than that, it's a good idea.
No, other than that.
No, and again, I was just mainly pointing out the disparity between the requirement for getting a loan and for forgiveness, and I think the argument to keep it as it is fine.
well, thank you.
But
so
it
much
does
for-
beg the issue of to whom do you renew or not. I mean, there's a certain point when you don't ignore some of those factors if you have finite funds and many eligible human beings. So it's relative to your funds availability, I think. But it's you give us that individual discretion anyway, so.
There is another academic requirement. It's to remain below 150 total attempted hours. So in addition to the completion of 75% and the cumulative GPA, there's also that.
So it's also serving a purpose of helping us get students to graduate on time, even with a 2.5. So I kind of see the 2.5 as get your cake, 3.0 get the icing, to get it forgiven. So I still think it's valuable to award that to students, even with a 2.5. Encourage them. We could probably do more communication. Okay, listen, if you get up to 3.0, you're going to get it forgiven. But it's still such a really great benefit, even though it's for a small number of students, especially with reduced allocations on our part. So.
Okay. So continuing our discussion on loan defaults, the next item is going to be discussion of student loan default prevention and financial aid literacy pilot program. George Torres.
Okay, and I'm just going to go through some of the background, and Jeff Webster is here who, along with our Director of Financial Literacy, Sharon Kabine, have done the bulk of the work at trying to get this pilot program ready to go. The same bill that we just talked about, the Coordinated Award Sunset Bill, along with another bill, Senate Bill 680, created a pilot program to improve student loan default rates and financial aid literacy among post-secondary students. The bill is very simple. It's very basic. It focuses on institutions having informed consumers, that's the term used in the bill, as a tool to inform consumers with regard to all financial aid and student loan defaults as the tool to try to lower default rates. And the default rates they're talking about is the cohort default rate. So it's the federal cohort default rate. The pilot program would consist of schools, at least one school from each sector with a 20% rate or above average growth as compared to other institutional rates in Texas. So I think because it dealt with the cohort default rate, because Texas Guaranteed has administered the federal program, one of the federal programs since 1979, and we've administered the help schools with their cohort default rate. The coordinating board entered into an agreement with us that we would assist them to implement this pilot program. It's a 6-year pilot program. Our board of directors in April, I believe, passed a resolution committing Texas Guaranteed to assist in the pilot for the duration, for 6 years, at our cost. So we have, and you have a handout that describes the 7 components that we've come up with, or the staff has come up with, that we think comply with the bill's intent of developing informed consumers. We hope at TG, and I think the coordinating board hopes as well, that this is a first step on the part of the state, of the legislature, to establish a comprehensive student loan default prevention program for the state of Texas. We really hope this is the first time they've really done something like this with the federal programs. We've known for a long time that there's a need for student loan default prevention in Texas. That's what we do. That's what we've done for a long time. All of you all know that. And in a state that is as reliant on student debt as the primary mechanism, far more than most any other state, Texas really should have a comprehensive program that goes beyond the pilot program. And we hope that in setting up the pilot, you also have a list of the schools that have been chosen for the pilot. They've all agreed. They should be getting a letter pretty soon, if they haven't already, from the coordinating board, inviting them to participate. But we do hope that with the coordinating board, we can work together to get the legislature to maybe expand this into a full program to so that we can bring in all the other default prevention services that are offered at TG to really at least ensure that the services and programs are there. It's an interesting discussion we just had with the Be On Time program, because a lot of that applies to the federal program, and the federal program is much, much bigger, as all of you know. And the 3-year cohort default rates are going to increase. So we hope that this pilot is the first step towards moving to a full, comprehensive statewide program. And we hope that this model works in achieving that. So with that, I think I'll.
Excuse me, can I ask a question? George, it seems to me in some of the recent sessions there have been proposals to include financial literacy for high school students. Have any of those passed, or any of them shown life?
I think they've passed. I think they're optional. I'm not sure that it's required, personal financial literacy. But yeah, I know there have been bills to do that, and TG does some of that. We have a financial literacy program. And we are incorporating some of that into the pilot. A lot of these components, all but I think one, we do some of this already. And financial literacy is certainly an important part of that. And that's one of the things we would really like to do on a statewide basis. And we think this pilot is a good start, at least. And we hope that by the end of the year, we at least have everything set up and ready to go, maybe some preliminary results. But we'd like to go ahead and, with the coordinating board, do a preliminary initial report just to the next legislature saying, here's where we are with this thing. And it's a good idea. So I think Jeff's here. I'll just turn it over to him if that's okay.
So I didn't know if y'all wanted me to go over the elements or just respond to questions. George pretty much brought things up to date. my understanding is letters are about to go out or have gone out.
That's correct. The commissioner is out of town, but Dr. Alonso?
Excuse me. Thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, we are quite excited about this project. It is something that is needed and something that we're really looking forward to. And we thank TG for helping us with this and especially funding the project, the pilot project. We really are appreciative of that. The letters were prepared Friday, I believe it was, as to 11 schools. The commissioner has been out of town. He is due in the office tomorrow. I plan to go over that with him, brief him on it, and hopefully we'll get the letters out tomorrow. So
Great.
We're working on it as fast as we can. And thank you.
There are 12 schools now, right? Or did you hear from the last one?
Well, the last one has said that the financial aid office is very supportive, and they need to talk to their chief financial officer and then CEO. That all is supposed to happen this week. So I think we're real close to getting that 12th.
And thank you so much for reaching out to the schools.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement. I think there's a lot of interest in this. I think there's an acknowledgement that this could have a positive impact on schools' default rates and helping people make more informed decisions.
Jeff, I would imagine that I may speak for people here that if you don't mind just spending a moment to talk about the elements.
Sure.
We may not have had time to read all the materials that have been shared.
Sure, happy to. Well, first off, and it's not listed there, but I think the idea is that we'll have a kickoff orientation for the pilot schools where we bring them all into either Round Rock or Austin and basically walk them through, what to expect. But then when the real work happens, it begins with the data exchange, and that's sort of one of the premises behind the pilot program is that schools are unlikely to have the resources to intervene on each and every student. And so what will be real important is to try to target some of these intervention efforts to where they have the biggest bang for the buck. And so that begins with data analysis, and that feeds into a default prevention plan. The default prevention plan occurs when one of our default aversion account consultants meets with personnel from the school, cross-departmental team, to develop a default plan, focusing on consumer information, activities while the students are still in school. So they would go over those detailed analyses to try to figure out, okay, where, who among our population's defaulting, where would our best efforts be spent? So that discussion would occur early in the whole process. Then after that, probably the next element to come through would be the financial literacy training. And so that's a train the trainer model where that could be, we would train people at the schools to be able to provide that type of training to their students. That training can occur once they're trained, then those trainers can go to their students either in person or direct them to online counseling material that the TG has. So financial literacy training would be there. Then in a similar type of delivery mechanism, loan counseling. So this would be intermediate counseling. So right now, the federal statute requires entrance and exit counseling. This would be counseling that would occur annually. So the ideas, and Tom, I think, made reference to, the attention level is not really necessarily the greatest at entrance. They're not really thinking about long-term implications. Their concerns are more immediate. And then for exit counseling, the big problem there for a lot of students is the ones who need the counseling the most are those who have dropped out, and so they don't get the counseling. So annual counseling is a way to try to ensure that a good percentage of the people, the ones who need it most, get that counseling. And so that is will be through Train the Trainer. Same way, you can either do that in person, like they do at El Paso Community College, or you can do it online. Then there would also be monthly email tips. These would be college-going tips, financial tips. The idea is to try to identify what are the key things that you want students to do to be successful, and hopefully timed so that they're seasonal. For instance, you may want one of the first ones in the school year to be focusing on budgeting. So, okay, I'm now no longer a high school student. I'm in college. I'm kind of on my own. I'm more responsible for my finances. I may need some help. So maybe some of those monthly seasonal tips would be for that. Maybe the tip in January would be you or your parents advising them to fill out their income taxes electronically so that you can get the information back more quickly for use in the FAFSA. So the idea is that they would be seasonal tips, college going and financial, how to manage your money sorts of things. We also have what's listed here as individual borrower plans. And what that would be is contact centers. So they can call just like they do TFAC. Borrowers would be able to go on the internet, schedule an interview, an appointment to talk with a coach. These are people with over 15 years of financial aid experience who have also been trained on financial coaching. So the logic behind it is that counseling is most effective when it's personalized, customized to the student's unique situation, and that it's timed to be when it's needed. So when the time comes that these students, say, I really could, I'm struggling paying my rent, I may need some help. Here's a lifeline that you can call to get some advice. And our contact center would be able to do things like do computer chat, would be able to, with permission, look at the student's computer. So maybe they walk them through something like major choices to maybe they're trying to figure out what should I major in, and give them exposure to what their earnings are likely to be. Maybe it's some career counseling advice. Maybe it's, hey, I'm about to graduate. I'm real confused about what repayment options I should do. They can walk them through some of those calculators and show them, okay, under this plan, this is how much you have to pay. Under a different, this is how much you have to pay. So that would be the contact center. The other thing that is not really going to be online for this year, but we hope to in the second year, is training on best practices for integrating the messages between the financial aid office and academic advising and career counseling. So based on some research we've done, that connection between those three offices is not really the smoothest that it could be. It's better in some school sectors than others, but we believe that right now students are either getting mixed messages or uncoordinated messages, and that to make a fully informed decision about how much one should borrow, you really need to know things like how much am I likely to earn, and you won't be able to know that unless you know more about selecting your major. And once you've selected a major, what are the things that you can do to make sure you're able to enter the occupation of your choice? So in the first year, we were going to try to develop the materials for that kind of training, and then the second year deliver that. So the first year, we hope to have a convening that pulls together people from Texas from those three different offices: financial aid, academic advising, career counseling, and pulls in some of those practitioners. We'll bring in an expert. We're likely to have a real hotshot researcher from University of Wisconsin who's done a lot of research on comprehensive counseling. And so that would be what happens in that first year. So that's most of the elements. There'll be an assessment as part of this. In the statute, the assessment is, did you change default rates? And we all know that it's going to take years to influence default rates, focusing on activities while the students are, just starting college. So we want more intermediate assessments. So we'll be doing things like knowledge acquisition, knowledge retention, and then focusing on what are some of the key behaviors that we want students to do to be successful, and then measuring to see if they're in fact doing that.
Excellent. I think it was Jeff put a man in contact with me, just providing some information. He's got an app that he's developed. Was it you? And it works with students or people. They have to buy into it. It's so many dollars a month. But you set up your budget within your phone or whatever your smart device is, and it kind of keeps track of and sends you reminders. And it shows, like, basically with the GPS, if you're in a Starbucks and you're about to buy a coffee, it's going to send you a little reminder. Is this really what you should be doing? It's kind of an interesting concept, and you're paying for this to tell you that. But just where some of this is going and evolving, it was kind of interesting. A big brother in your pocket almost, but it was again very interesting. More questions, comments for Jeff or George on this? It is pretty exciting to see where it's going and the possibilities.
Just one thing, I'm not quite sure what the role of the advisory committee is here, but if, we certainly want your input, but we also, if you think it's a good idea to take something to the legislature. The first report's not due until 2016, but we would like to do a preliminary report just to show the next legislature that here's where we are on this thing. Here are the components Jeff just described, but then here's what the cohort default rate is. Here's how it's calculated. Here are all the other programs and services that really impact student loan default rates. And in Texas, we've done a pretty good job considering the demographics and closing the gaps. Most years we've had a single digit rate. And so we've done a pretty good job with all these other services, but the bill doesn't call for these other services. It just calls for the one, informed consumers. But we would appreciate the advisory committee taking a look at this and considering maybe supporting going to the legislature and saying, hey, why don't we just turn this into a full-blown thing and bring in all these other services? There's a cost, but we think it's worth it. It's not expensive, but it would be a good thing for the state to have something that applies beyond 12 schools and beyond just informed consumers. But that's for your consideration.
George, as a community college, I would say definitely we support this. And I mean, I'm one of the pilot schools, thank you. But,
that's Jeff's fault, not mine.
Yeah. No, I'm okay. But, obviously we have a high default rate in community colleges. We have a very high-risk population. And, for a couple of years there, I think we were the door when they were getting laid off. We were the front door that they were going to, even just for financial aid, just for money. And it's obviously beginning to show in our default rates. So I definitely would, support having this at a full-blown scale level. And as our resources at our colleges are also decreasing, just the staff to do this is like there's no staff to do this. So I would say we definitely support it, and I'm sure Harold would second that.
Thank you.
And I think you can get some economies of scale doing it this way.
More questions, comments, thoughts? I think folks are really on board with it. I do. Okay. Next, discussion of Texas grant eligibility for transfer students. Jane.
You do not have a handout on this. And after we've had the discussion, if anyone would like my notes, I'd be glad to send you a copy of them. And I would actually slightly change the title to talk more about Texas grant eligibility and transfer of students and funds, because one of the things that we're experiencing for 2015 is a huge transition between our two major grant programs, Texas Grant and TEOG, or two of our three major grant programs. In particular, and I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, Gesundheit, the two-year institutions are being phased out of the Texas Grant program this coming year. And we have been working with the dollar amounts that are involved in all of this. But one of the things that's going to occur is that the two-year institutions who, for TEOG, have had a program of basically $14 million a year will suddenly see TEOG become a $50 million program this coming fall. And they will be making awards to entering undergraduate students through just the one program, not through both Texas Grant and TEOG, which we hope will make things easier for them. But there are differences between the TEOG and the Texas Grant program that they need to be aware of, and their packaging and such, they need to be sensitive to it. Among other things, the Texas Grant program in the past has had a target amount, which was, I think, $13.25 at community colleges. TEOG has never had a target amount. And so you're going to be receiving this $37 million from the Texas Grant program that will become TEOG funds, and you will have some serious decisions about award amounts and how to stretch it among all the students. If your average TEOG award is greater than your average Texas Grant award, then once you transfer these monies into TEOG and start awarding it, you're going to end up serving fewer students than you have in the past. You're just going to be giving smaller chunks of money to a smaller group, or larger chunks of money to a smaller group of people. That is within your purview. That's certainly something you can do, but it's something you need to be aware of, that if you just apply the basic TEOG packaging to now your full population, the result is going to be that you're going to have more students not able to get state grants. One of the things that we're looking at in terms of funding as we go into the next biennium is we've been invited to indicate exceptional items, which is requests for additional money for the various programs that we have. For Texas Grant and TEOG, even our starting place is now scrambled from where it would have been 2 years ago. And that 2 years ago, TEOG starting point, the baseline, would have been this $13.9 million a year. Now the starting point, as we try to figure out what to do in 16 and 17, is the $13.9 million per year plus the $37.3 million transferred in from TEOG. Now, if we try running forward with just those three amounts for the next biennium, the two-year colleges experience a significant decrease in their funding because you're not getting any Texas Grant money. And you're now getting just only 1 year's worth of what had been Texas Grant awards. So one of the exceptional items we're very likely to go forward with is a request for additional money for TEOG to bring up that amount so that it meets the current year or fiscal year 15 amount in the TEOG program once that transfer is made. So that's going to be probably requesting $37 million from the state in addition to what we had. Texas Grant has the opposite situation in that it is losing, it has lost the $37 million during the current biennium, and its base for next year would not include that money. We also have had the luxury this biennium of a $30 million donation from TG, which is not expected to occur next biennium, though we'd be very happy to accept it if that decision were made. So we've got a decrease in the funding, total funding for Texas Grant, but we also have Texas Grant becoming a university-only program. I mean, we've got all sorts of little irons in the fire that are coming up as we go forward and try to plan. If we look at a $5,000 target award amount for the Texas Grant Program, which is what we have had for the last several years, we actually would have the capacity with current funding to expand the program to add more students who are not currently able to receive it. One of the dilemmas we have in trying to do projections for these numbers is that we reach out to institutions for information, and it's kind of like the blind people touching the parts of the elephant. You have institutions who say, we are currently able to give 5,000 awards to all of our entering freshmen, and therefore, if you give us additional money, thank you very much, we'll give larger awards. We have other institutions who have indicated, no, we're still unable to serve X percent of our entering population, so certainly if we get more money, we will make additional awards to students. So we've got those two ideas roaming around as justifications for additional funding for Texas Grant. Anytime anyone wants to jump in with comments, questions, I'll be glad to stop talking. The transfer student question, as we move forward, is that we now have, or we will have, students who have entered in TEOG, and in order to get funding through the Texas Grant Program, will be moving to universities in order to get access to the Texas Grant Program. Obviously, that's not the reason they're going to universities, but when they move to a university, they will have the option of entering into the, or at least being considered for an initial award in Texas Grant. The provisions in statute right now are that for a person coming from a two-year college to qualify for initial year Texas Grant money, there are two paths. One is the path that's been there for a long time, and that's that you have an associate's degree and enroll in the university within 12 months of getting that associate's degree. The other path is a new one that's indicated in statute now that says that a person who receives an initial TEOG either in fall 2014 or later can, when they transfer into the Texas Grant Program, qualify, if they meet all the other provisions, for an initial Texas Grant Program. Now notice it's only applying to people who got a TEOG in fall 2014 or later. So those students of yours who got into the Texas Grant Program this year or in the past, when they move on to the university, their way of entering into the Texas Grant Program will not have changed. It will continue to be through the AD pathway. That's not a totally honest answer in that there was another window opened for people who graduate from high school and enter the military. They will not be going through the community college pathway, but there is a pathway for them to get into the Texas Grant Program once they have an honorable discharge, and if they go into college within 12 months of their honorable discharge. So we have these various doors opening to the Texas Grant Program, but for the two-year institutions, it's mainly through the AD as in the past, and now through this new one where they got the TEOG in fall 2014 or later, and then move on to a four-year institution. One of the questions that this committee has talked about in the past is the question of how will universities be able to identify students who have had a TEOG in fall 2014 or later, or who received a Texas grant at some time in the past and might be eligible to come in at the university level as a renewal student. Sophia Rodriguez is sitting right over here. She and others have worked really, really hard on a project that the committee has heard about before, and it actually will have a thing for TEG as well, so private schools will be helped, which will enable colleges, universities, or community colleges, or private institutions to submit a list of their students, and if I remember correctly, they have to do it individually for the Texas Grant or the TEOG program or TEG program, but they will be able to literally submit a list of all their financial aid applicants and get a list back indicating whether they have received awards through the Texas Grant Program, TEOG, or the TEG program. So the ability to identify renewal students or people who have gotten these kinds of awards in the past hopefully will be much easier in the future. You won't have to go in and enter 5 people at a time. You'll be able to enter or submit long lists for that purpose. And so the effective date, the online date or target date for having that fully operational is July 15th, which will be right after all of the spring end-of-year reports have been submitted. So if you are submitting end-of-year reports, we recommend getting them in well ahead of time. If you stretch out beyond the July 15, your data will not be available when these queries start being run. But the intent is to make it as easy as possible for institutions to identify incoming transfer students who have had awards in the past and might be able to use one of these windows for getting into the Texas Grant Program for the future. Any questions on any of this? Sophia, did I say that somewhat correctly? Yay. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah. It was having received a TEOG, having received a Texas grant, and wasn't there a third?
The pathways for getting into the Texas Grant Program will still be the associate's degree, so that would not be in this. That wouldn't be on the list, yeah. And then it would also be the TEOG in fall 2014 or later, or have received the Texas Grant in the past and be eligible as a renewal student. So we could have students receiving renewal Texas grants this year or next year who would not get into the TEOG program next fall, perhaps, and therefore the fact that their renewal would be the basis on which they could get back into the Texas Grant Program as they move forward.
And did you say July 15th?
July 15th is our target date to have people can do it now in the test mode, but the fully functional ability to submit lists will be should be July 15th.
Okay, and there'll be instructions and how to initiate that process.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay, the comment over there is that July 1st is our deadline or our target date for getting the instructions out and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, I was talking,
I'm sorry, Jane, forgive me, one other question. You had made reference at the beginning of your discussion about $37.3 million being transferred from Texas Grant to the TEOG program. Is that the amount that when we got our preliminary allocations had to be certified by the LBB? It is slightly
different. The original, the preliminary numbers that were sent out for Texas Grant and TEOG were based on $724 million appropriation this biennium for the Texas Grant Program. After those had been sent out, we discovered that there was a $5 million amount included in that was contingent upon carry forward from the prior biennium, and we had not recognized that conditional status. So that $5 million has come out of the program. As far as we know, that will be the only adjustment made, and that $5 million adjustment would be across all initial year allocations, so 2-year and 4-year institutions.
Now, has that been certified by the LBB at this point?
It has not. It is at the LBB for their approval, but that has not occurred yet.
How long has that been at the LBB?
The original numbers went to them in April. We then determined the $5 million problem and had to submit new data to them, and I'm sorry, I don't remember when those new numbers were sent to them. The process has been going on. They are asking a lot of interesting questions about how the calculations were done, but as we have, at least at this point, still no sense when it will be finalized, but we don't anticipate a problem. We just are not there yet.
Are there any questions that they've posed that haven't been responded to yet?
No, sir.
Is it the LBB itself that has to certify this, or is it the staff of the LBB?
If I remember the rider correctly, it indicates it must be approved by the LBB, and it's not a person on my level. It is moving up through the hierarchy.
Okay, so it may be that the elected members of the legislature who sit on the LBB have to
I'm sorry,
approve this, right?
I don't know.
And
Okay.
there's not going to be an impact?
Again, the five, as far as I know, the $5 million that has been spread across everyone's initial year allocation will be the only impact, only change that should be there when it comes out, gets finalized.
So a reduction. We have a reduction.
That's a question, a reduction.
We're awarding to the penny at this point because of other reductions. So I'm just trying to figure out what kind of, what we're looking at.
That was the reason for the preliminary nature of the allocation.
We can, if anyone wants to contact us, we can give you what the estimate of the new number would be. Again, I don't think we want to send out another preliminary number and then wait again. So, but if you want to contact me, I can get that information for you. I think the impact on most institutions at most was 1 or 2%. Again, it's $5 million spread across how many? 75 institutions that are in the Texas Grant Program. There are a couple of other things I'd like to put on the table while we're talking about money and such, and that is that I mentioned before that we had talked about, I think this committee had talked about, or at least it had come up in the Texas Grant negotiated rulemaking committee discussion, the desire to raise the target amount for Texas grant awards. At present, for universities, which will be the only group making awards in the future, that target is $5,000. And it was set at $5,000 in 2012, and at that time that represented about 70.4% of the tuition and fees, which at that time statewide average was around $7,100. We have done some preliminary calculations that if we tried to raise it back up to the 70% and we're using $8,100 or $8,200 as the tuition and fee rates, then we're looking at $5,775 in 2016 and $5,834 in the next year, or somewhere close to that. That additional $775 in 1 year and $800 and whatever dollars in the second year, when you apply it to 60,000 recipients in the Texas Grant Program, come out to a total in the biennium of about $100 million. That's just to raise the target amounts so that the buying power is similar to what it was in 2012. So those are numbers being looked at. They're numbers being talked about. I have no idea at this point what the exceptional item for the programs will be. But one of the things that comes up is if we have to negotiate, if we have to give up something in order to do something like this, what do we give up? And if we look at our programs that are on the table, or that we currently participate in, are there programs that this committee would feel should be given lower priority than other programs that are out there? And if I can take a second, I'll read you a list of the programs I'm talking about. And these are, I want to make sure you understand, these are in alphabetical order, not in any other order. Okay, Be On Time happens to be first in the alphabet. Loan repayment programs, college work study, TEG, TEOG, Texas Armed Services Scholarship, Texas Grants, Top 10. If we have to decrease one or more of these other programs, does this committee have a program they feel that should apply to?
Be sure and state your name when you make your comments.
Well, Jane, and I appreciate some of the issues I think you folks are probably dealing with, but I do think it's worth noting that, at least from everything I've read, the legislature is looking at a significant budget surplus for the next biennium. And I'm not sure we have to start out thinking in terms of sacrificing something else to reestablish the purchasing power of a state grant program that was severely cut in the 2011 legislative session when the state was facing a deficit. It seems to me that we have, for the last, by 2015, it will have been for 4 years, subjected the students of the state of Texas to bearing the brunt or part of the brunt of that deficit when it was no fault of theirs that the state entered into it. And I would hope that the coordinating board would feel it's prudent to advocate strongly for not just an increase in Texas grant appropriations, but a net increase in appropriations for the state's whole financial aid structure.
Well, and Tom, I have couched my question in terms of if it's either or, what would it be that you would decrease? As we go forward in preparing our legislative appropriation request, we are being asked how much additional money do you want over here? And then on the other side, if we have to cut, what do you want to cut? So we need to look at both sets of questions independently. If you decouple those two issues and just say, okay, if we are placed in a position as hopefully unlikely as it appears to be, of having to cut or eliminate a program or programs, in this list, is there one or more that we should eliminate, with the understanding that on the other side, we are looking at requesting additional money because we are hoping that these cuts will never be looked at and never be considered. But we're asked to prepare both sides of that for the LAR process.
Now, toward that end, do you have data suggesting the effectiveness of the various loan repayment programs that the coordinating board administers?
Certainly with regard to the physician education loan repayment program, we do. The teacher loan repayment assistance program, we can only say that, that the program has been oversubscribed since the beginning. The last time it was fully funded, or I should say not fully funded, the last time we had enough funds to accept applications from first-time applicants was in 2011, and we received over 6,000 applications for approximately 1,200 slots, 1,200 to 1,400. I would say the majority of the inquiries we receive in our loan repayment programs work group are from teachers clamoring for loan repayment, whose salaries haven't,
Sure.
have stagnated. If you look at the salary schedule on the TEA website, it's only the beginning salaries. I recognize that, but it's still, a teacher that's been teaching for 15 years doesn't make very much more than a first-year teacher. And when you look at the shortage subjects that are, math and science in particular, English as a second language, bilingual ed, school districts are struggling, to keep those teachers.
Right.
So, we haven't done a massive survey to ask people, how much did this loan repayment award influence your decision? We just know that, the teachers are, desperately wanting loan repayment assistance. Those are the two main programs.
The physician programs? The
physician education loan repayment program, has expanded substantially since 2000. Well, first in 2009, there were changes to the tax code for smokeless tobacco that created a very good revenue stream, and a portion of those receipts are appropriated for PELRP. The program was cut from, I think, $22 million for the 2000 2010-11, it had been expanded to that point. And just as we got the program up and running with people applying for loan repayment for up to $160,000 over a period of 4 years, we kind of had to put the brakes on because it was cut to $5.6 million for the next biennium. The current funding is at $33 million, and I was very surprised that we were able to receive, I think it was well over 200 applications between June of 2013 and August 31st for people wanting to enroll in the program. And so it's really taken off.
Can you mention what is it that they do in order
yes,
to get the money?
Yes, to qualify, the physicians have to agree to practice for 4 years in a federally designated health professional shortage area. Many of those areas are rural and, desperately underserved. Well, all of them are underserved. There's another pathway that I won't go into too many details, but after we consider all of the physicians practicing in shortage areas, additional physicians can qualify on the basis of meeting certain Medicaid and Texas Women's Health Program service levels. So, and these folks have a lot of student loan debt. We had one physician the other day that we saw had, believe it or not, $500,000 in loan debt. That's the extreme, but the median on average is about $120,000 to $160,000 in debt. So,
what do we know about the earnings of those physicians?
Well, I really can't answer that.
Because a $500,000 loan debt is not a big loan debt.
That is extreme.
If one has very high earnings.
What we're finding is that the prospect of loan repayment is, in fact, influencing decisions. You have to influence those decisions during the second year, maybe third year of residency training. But people are definitely challenged by the amount of debt they have. So, I don't know what their income is, but their overall ability to pay, this program is definitely influencing decisions.
If I may, there's one program in particular. I was trying to be subtle, and no one has come forward, so I need to throw a program on the table for discussion, and that is the Top 10 Scholarship. For the coming year, the awards in the scholarship are $600 for the first award, and for renewal, $1,000. I'm sorry, I forgot to put on my microphone. The Top 10 Scholarship for the current year, for the coming year, initial awards are for $600, renewal awards for $1,000, and that's because of limited funding in the program. The intent of the program is to encourage our top students coming out of high school to remain in Texas as opposed to go out of state to go to college. And I guess there is some real question as to whether at $600 and $1,000 that is going to have any impact at all. If we have to make a choice between Top 10 funding and other program funding, should we be advocating additional funding for the Top 10 program to get it up to where it's high enough to actually have an impact on those decisions? Or should we reduce it to being renewal students only and have that other money available for other kinds of programs? What is the thought of the committee?
Well, as a community college, I would go for that because we hardly have those. So, yeah. Now,
But
Tom,
is
you think different?
$1,000 even enough to do any good to keep them in state?
The only thing that I would argue for the top 10 is that, and I know they are small amounts, but we do have the luxury of giving it to someone with very, 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 very little bit of need, and we run out of those resources when we get into those higher EFC groups. So even $600, we're experimenting right now with a $1,000 scholarship for kids that don't have any need or have very little need, just because there have been studies even at our institution that giving somebody $1,000 that's not getting anything else does have an impact on whether they choose to come to school, because we're still relatively inexpensive. So yes, I would like for the top 10 to be higher, but $600 to $1,000 is not completely unreasonable to maybe say, you know, for a kid that's not getting much of anything else, or all they're getting are scholarships, it could help make their decision. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a few books.
You mentioned earlier on with your Texas grant discussion the exceptional item.
Yes, sir.
Are we doing one on the top 10?
There have been discussions, general discussions about all the programs. There's nothing yet specific for Texas Grant, TEFG, or Top 10.
I think we ran some numbers that looked at the percentage of Top 10 scholarships going to, what was it, like 28 to 30% going to the two flagship institutions. And, I don't know if...
Has there been any...
I don't think we have information on the impact of decisions for those students that a $600 award would have.
Is there research or evidence that shows that since we implemented it, that the percentage of students graduating from Texas high schools in the top 10% are staying in Texas at higher rates than they did in the past? Because I would challenge that.
Feedback I've received shows that has been very effective, and that comes from an institution I'm somewhat related to.
But I mean on a statewide basis.
But it's been very effective for them.
But on the statewide basis, do we know?
As far as I know, that's research has not been done. The data may exist and we may be able to get there, but I'm unaware of it having been done.
Then it would be hard for us to make a decision. I mean, one of the things I think we really have to start thinking about as we're looking at data, and, we're talking about data in some areas, but then we're sitting here saying, well, let's make a decision about what we'd like to propose cutting without having any kind of data to support that decision. So if we truly are going to look at, if that was the intended purpose of the top 10, well, did it? If the data is there, then we should probably take a look and see and it's gone from $1 amount, $2,000 down to $600. Did we see a decrease over that? Of course, we're not going to know that until this next fall. But I do think that if we're going to make decisions when we've got reduced funding or level funding, or we're trying to make suggestions to the for the next legislative session, we have got to look at data. And actually, the legislators are looking for that. And talking with Zaffarini's office, they're wanting data this fall to look at whether any changes should take place for Texas Grant. So, because they're getting ready to go into legislative session again. So they're going to ask us for some data. I think we have got to make sure that we have something to support the decisions that we're making as a committee if we're going to be considered a viable committee. So that would be my soapbox. I'll get off of it.
Yeah, I agree. And is intent to cut the program completely or reduce the allocation in the program? Or again, is that what needs to be decided based on the data?
That would be the result of finding the. I'm sorry. Let me try that again. The path of what's best to do would be based on this research if the data is available. We're talking very short timeline at this point in time for at least the preliminary numbers for the legislative appropriations requests. So the two main options that we had discussed in-house, and when I say we, I don't mean the front office, or we're just talking at our level, is whether it should be phased out and just make renewal awards to those who are qualifying so no one just gets the floor jerked out from under them, or to raise the funding enough to have an impact at whatever funding level that might entail.
We have students that ask for the top 10% scholarship, that ask about it. So, I think it's out there already. So to go in and without having any kind of, I guess, have we even determined if we're meeting the purpose of the program? And I know it's a short turnaround time, but there's got to be some kind of data, and all the stuff that we have to submit, there's got to be some kind of data that could help us look at, have we even met I mean, I know it's a lot to ask, but we really need to start looking at that before we go in and say, oh yeah, let's just cut the program, or no, we need to ask for more funding, or it needs to stay level. It's really hard for me to sit here and say, cut the program when I have students asking, even at $600, asking about the top 10% scholarship. It does help supplement the other funds that we have to create a whole package. So I think that's the dilemma that most of us have, and this is at all types of institutions. It's like we have this big pot of money, and then we just try to figure out how to distribute it the best way we can to serve the students that we want to have at our institutions and set up for success. Those top 10% kids are ones that are going to help our graduation and retention rate. So to lose a scholarship for that particular population when we're trying to increase that population would hurt our efforts down the road.
Well, and for Texas grant, for 37 and a half hours or whatever, I'm just saying that might put the things kind of on equal footing.
I'm sorry, give me those numbers again, Harold.
Which ones?
Your recommendation is that they would have 3 years.
3 years, 99 hours, or
and
90?
That's a combination between the two programs at a community college. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying you gave two options: the 5-year, 150-hour limit for community colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Change that to 3 years and 90 hours
for Texas grant.
For TEOG.
For TEOG.
Right.
It is currently 4 years 75, and you would make it 3 years 99?
I'm sorry. I thought you meant that the maximum for TEOG was 5 years, 150 hours, and the maximum for Texas grant was the 4 year, 75 hours.
No, the TEOG, I'm sorry, I probably said it too quickly. TEOG currently has a 75-hour limit or 4 years at a 2-year institution. And then the Texas grant has the 5 years for a 4-year degree and 150 hours.
Oh, I had them reversed then.
Is too high?
Well, at our institution, our new director sends some research, and our students go an average of 10 hours a semester, not 15. So, if a student had 4 years, that would be 80 hours. So they would be over the limit. They would use up all of their hours before they hit their 4-year,
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, it looks like it's a little bit skewed on the community college side, where those students would have a little more eligibility time-wise, not hour-wise, but still half of the hours, but 4 years to do half of the hours.
I assume I was.
Part-time enrollment?
I'm not sure of the logic behind it, but I assume the 4 years for 75 hours at a 2-year institution was based on the assumption that for TEOG you can receive one if enrolled half-time. And the idea was to give a student 4 years to acquire an associate's degree, probably. And I'm way out of my depth there. I don't know the rationale behind these numbers. But the Texas grant originally was 6 years, 150 hours, and they reduced it to 5 years for a 4-year degree, but kept the 150-hour limit for the Texas grant program. TEOG has from the beginning been at 4 years or 75 hours that you lost.
So we would have to be careful if TEOG is for someone going half-time, at least half-time, then we need to be careful what we set that maximum for now that we're making the transition from TEOG to Texas grant. Setting a 5-year limit is going to be unreasonable for a student coming in with if they come in with 75 hours and they did that as a part-time student and now they want to go full-time at one of the public institutions, only giving them another year is not going to be a reason. So we're going to have to think about that before we set that maximum, because I think I know we talked about this before, I just don't remember the discussion that we had, but I think I remember us talking about looking at when they transfer in, they have this many hours, and so therefore then they would have this much time and this many hours left in the Texas grant program,
right,
is what we talked about. While that may be hard to manage, if we've got a system that gives us that information when they're coming in, then as a public institution we should be able to track that and determine, okay, if they're coming in with 60 hours, then we've said that, and that's basically 2 years worth of hours, then they would have, another 2 to 3 years to complete the rest of their degree.
If I remember what our discussion was, is that for Texas Grant, you have 150 hours of eligibility. If a student came in with 75 hours and therefore had 75 hours still available, then that 75 hours would be divided by X hours to determine how many semesters of Texas Grant eligibility you would have. Lynn, isn't that close to what was discussed before? So there's the time limit in Texas Grant for someone coming in from TEOG would be based on the number of hours they still have of eligibility divided by at least the 3/4 time enrollment or whatever. So it was not a fixed number of hours or years for the two of them. That would depend on the number of hours of eligibility left when they came into the Texas Grant program.
If we keep the 150 hours. And if memory serves, some of the discussion that came up, not only with this, is right now I think there's a loophole in that whole Texas Grant thing with the 150 hours because it's 150 hours of receiving Texas Grant. So summer doesn't even count against the student. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it should be 150 total hours, not 150 receiving the TEG/Texas Grant, because students are able to continue, especially if we're not going to add that. If we're going to say they got 75 more hours and we divide that by 15 hours, or 12 hours on average, I think we're going to be giving students a lot longer to finish as transfer students than we are the freshmen. And I do think the other discussion we need to have is that 150 hours really should be total hours, not hours receiving the grant program.
You mean hours attempted?
Hours attempted, yeah, hours attempted would make more sense than hours receiving the Texas Grant. Because what if they're off a semester because they lost eligibility and then they regain it, and none of those hours counted against them? So that's a loophole I think that we need to fix in the Texas Grant program. And now that we're having the discussion about TEOG to Texas Grant, this may be an opportunity to look at that, even if it has to be a statutory.
And that should be the same way it applies at the community colleges. 75 hours attempted as opposed to the 4 years, which really becomes kind of irrelevant.
Is that as far as I know, the interpretation of the 150 hours and the 75 hours has been a policy issue, not in statute. The statute indicates you can receive it for up to 150 hours, for instance, for Texas Grant. And that was interpreted as indicating receiving Texas grants for 150 hours paid for with Texas grants. That's how we got there.
Let's change it.
Is this committee as a whole?
I'm apparently on a few soapboxes today, but if we're talking about limited, I know, we're talking about limited funding and we're talking about cutting another program or looking at all these other programs, and we've got a flaw in one of our programs that's allowing students, and we're all looking at increasing our retention and graduation rates, and so we're trying to get students in, get them to complete on time, and there's always exceptions to the rule. But now we've got students are getting the Texas Grant for way more hours than what they should, because if they choose to go during the summer or other times, I've had an issue with that 150-hour deal for a long time because we were calculating it wrong in the beginning. So once that got corrected, we're seeing all these students getting Texas Grant for more hours than what they really should.
Okay.
Anyway, so.
Marcus, this might be something to ask for a vote on from the committee, and then if they recommend it, we can see if we can move in that direction.
Do we have a motion regarding the rules?
I would like to make a motion that we look at changing the rules for the 150-hour requirement.
And the 75-hour requirement to be calculated on attempted hours.
Yes. That motion, all of that.
Yeah.
So can someone succinctly provide that motion again?
Lisa can.
Thank you, Harold. Appreciate your support. I make a motion that we look at revising the rules for to define the 150-hour rule for four-year institutions, a 75-hour rule for community colleges to include attempted hours, not just hours when they receive the actual funding for TEOG and Texas Grant.
And I assume this would be applied in the future, not in any way retroactively.
Yes.
Yes. That'd be too hard.
We're not going to take money back.
I'm not repeating that again.
Yeah. That motion is stated. Do we have a second?
I second it.
More discussion? Comments?
This would go adopted into effect like for the 15-16 year, because we're already awarding this year.
So add to that motion 15-16 award year. Okay. Anything else? A second to that? Yes, ma'am.
It occurred to me, just flashed through, that one of the reasons that you weren't counting the summer hours was because some students who didn't make SAP would use the summer to recover enough GPA or enough hours to then be included. Now, if that doesn't matter to anybody, that's okay, but that was the rationale for not charging that against the 150 hours.
But I don't think that they would lose anything. They still have the opportunity to if, let's say at the end of spring, they're not eligible for the Texas grant because they didn't complete all the hours, right? And so then they're going to, we advise them during the summer, okay, listen, you have an opportunity, you can take 6 more hours during the summer and regain that eligibility. So what I'm saying is I think those 6 hours should count, because the whole reason why they're there is because they didn't complete the requirements of the program in fall, spring. So basically they're getting double rewards for not doing what they're supposed to for SAP. So from my perspective, they still have that opportunity to regain eligibility for the fall, but I think those hours that they take during the summer should count, because they possibly enrolled for 30 and only completed 24. I'm just making numbers up, but I still think that that's still there. They still can do that, but I think they should count. I don't think hours when you're not, it's attempted hours. We're giving students a lot of money they're getting their tuition and fees covered for longer periods of time and for more hours than what they really need to when we're trying to encourage them to graduate and retain, and we have limited fundings, and we're talking about cutting other programs.
Okay, motion's on the table. Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
We've got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
What we will do is...
Opposed?
Excuse me.
Okay.
We will take this to our legal counsel and get confirmation that the wording of the statute allows us to move in this direction, and we will we'll go forward from that.
Excellent. Okay, now question. We've got 2 more things on the agenda. We're moving nicely. Do we want to take a break, a short break, come back and get finished and dismiss early? Do we want to break for lunch and extend this meeting time for an hour and a half? I personally have an opinion, but I will...
I say let's
stay and dismiss early.
Break and then get back to it. Dismiss early.
I like that. Okay.
There's snack machines back there.
Yeah, they've got a break room down there. Jane made brownies. There's coffee, beverages. We will start back very, very, very closely to 10 till. Thank you.
10 till? 10 till. Okay.
Our next group is a discussion and presentation from the Financial Aid Audit and Compliance Professionals Group. We have Chrisanna Black from UNT, Tanya Vidito from UT Arlington, my bad, and Shannon Followill from Texas Tech. Welcome. Our world has changed quite a bit, and regulations, we have more. And this group has kind of been, well, I'll let y'all explain how you all got together, what happened. Oh, I'm sorry, and you were going to make a comment first.
Do you mind if I ask my question? May I have your 30 seconds? So I apologize for not mentioning this earlier. I'm trying to learn how to
Microphone
listen.
on?
Yes.
Okay.
Learning how to listen as well as figure out when to speak as a newcomer. So something that comes to mind when we talk about the Texas grant program shifting to 4-year institutions only is, I know the rise in community colleges that award BA degrees. I don't know how prevalent that is in Texas, but it makes me curious how shifting the 75 hours might affect students who are completing BA degrees through 2-year colleges. Would it preclude support of those students? And would students, more generally, who are completing a BA through a 2-year college, would they be eligible for Texas grants or not at all because those are 2-year institutions?
Is this where you point at Jane?
I think you probably do need to restate that for Jane. Because, or unless, Lynn, did you want to address that?
Yeah, an eligible institution in the future is only going to be the 4-year public institutions and the health science centers. Now, a student can continue to receive a renewal award at the 2-year institution while working on a degree there, but you cannot get an initial award.
So you couldn't get a new award.
That's correct.
But after it shifts to 4-year and you're still completing at your 2-year, but a 4-year degree, you could continue.
If you received an initial Texas grant prior to fall 2014.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
That help?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to overlook you.
I apologize. Thank you, though.
Ladies.
Marcus and Coordinating Board, Financial Aid Advisory Committee, thank you for having us this morning. We are very excited to be here. And on behalf of Chrisanna and Tanya and myself, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Shannon Followill. I'm from Texas Tech University. I'm the Associate Director of Maintenance and Compliance, and I've been working with auditors since 2010. So it's been quite the journey, and I'll let the rest of our team introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Vidito. I'm the Associate Director of Audit, Compliance, and Training at UT Arlington. I'm the newbie to the group. I'm working on about 1.5 years in the UT system. My background was compliance with private loans prior to coming to an institution. And then I've also been a consultant and I've been a financial aid auditor.
I'm Chrisanna Black with the University of North Texas. I'm Associate Director for Audit and Compliance. I've been working with auditors since 2008, although I've been in the Financial Aid Office since 2006.
We're here today to share with you information about our financial aid and compliance professional group that we refer to as Faac. So it kind of sounds like you're Faac, but there's a P on the end. So since we're in Texas, if you can't hear the P, I think everybody knows I said it. So while we are all compliance professionals, one of the time-consuming aspects of all of our professions is the audit. And Texas state institutions are subject to what is commonly referred to as the OMB A133 audit of federal funds. This task is performed in Texas by the state auditor's office. Not all states choose to use a combined federal audit like the state of Texas does, with the state auditor's office doing that. But in Texas, those are the statutes that we work under. As a result of the volume of 8 schools combined in Texas, there are 8 public institutions in Texas that receive a full scope annual audit by the state auditor's office. We represent 3 of those 8. This is, while there are other institutions that make up the schools audited, but those are randomly selected. The top 8 are selected based on dollar volume of federal aid. So the same 8 of us are not getting randomly audited. We are getting particularly audited due to the volume so that the state auditors can meet their minimum audit dollar requirements quicker and more efficiently. So our needs at the 8 institutions and our concerns are a little broader than the other state institutions. While they may be subject to a random audit at some point by the state auditor's office, those are limited in scopes and, again, random. We are fully audited regardless of whether or not we are 100% compliant in a particular area from year to year at our institutions. And while none of our institutions have any expectation not to be audited, as that is our responsibility with Title IV funds, the scope in which the state auditors use for their particular audit is a lot stronger and in depth compared to what I performed as a private auditor who performs audits on the other institutions, private and community and proprietary institutions, and as well as any program review that we would receive from the Department of Education. The little background on that, our audits, we just received our 2013 audit results from the state in February of 2014, but we received our engagement letters in April of 2013. So that kind of gives you an idea, too, of the involvement and why there are compliance positions within the financial aid offices at these particular institutions. As a result of that, compliance officers, we decided to get together and form a group where we could assist each other in a collaborative effort and develop a positive working relationship with the state auditor's office to make the ease of the audit and the documentations and things that we provide easier for everyone. So with that, I will pass it over to Shannon to tell you about our membership.
We currently have 11 state institutions in our membership and 18 individuals. And within that, we have most of those schools are within the A133. We also have a couple of private institutions that joined our group in the beginning. And we also have been approached to suggest that maybe the smaller, like the community colleges, the private or the proprietorship institutions, the private schools that don't fall under these same guidelines, possibly form a group similar to ours, and we would be happy to help set that up or provide any guidance that we can, because it is very beneficial for everybody to be on the same page, and everyone's governed a little differently, so we would be happy to set that up with you. What we do with our membership is we usually meet probably 3 to 4 times a year, usually before the audit, after the audit, and then we communicate via email and listserv opportunities for questions, regulations. What are they doing at your school? How are they acting? What are they asking for? Can you shed any light on that? And we help communicate that and form a type of support group for the other schools. We keep a calendar of all the schools that are being audited with the A133, and we know who's where. And once we get the team announcements, we put who's on whose team, so we know who's going where, and it just really helps with the communication. And as far as attendance and the meeting format, we usually do a call for agenda items. We talk about hot topics. We talk about regulations coming down the pipeline. How is it affecting your school? How are you doing it at your school? We share policies and procedures. We post those to our shared drive system and allow other schools to participate in that as well.
I wanted to point out one of the things that we were able to do as a group was to meet with the state auditors last year before we had the audit, and we asked for some recommendations. Several were in attendance at the meeting and some were calling in, but we had a large group represented, and we were asking questions like, one of the main things was that we were getting a lot of repeat questions, many emails. And so we asked, instead of using their FTP share their website to upload the information if we could use SharePoint as a secure website. That way we are able to organize the information exactly how they're requesting it, because there's a lot of information that they're requesting and they're not always understanding the file names and what this information corresponds to what they were asking. And that was very helpful. Also, we were able to track all of the emails that they were requesting. And so not only would one auditor be able to see their requests, but the audit team leader could see all the requests, and other auditors would be able to see what information was already asked. And that really did help cut down on the duplicate request, and that was huge. We had also found that there was some information that was being asked after they did the main population request about cash management. The cash management information was right before the auditors came, and they were wanting a bunch of other additional information. So we explained and asked if they would please include that as part of their main population request, and they were happy to do so. We also asked for some information, since we're working in a sample population with other offices in the registrar's office, to set up testing environments, if we could get that information ahead of time. So that would help us prepare and get the information available and get a lot of legwork done, because when they're just there those 2 weeks, thank goodness, and we're able to be more efficient and schedule appointments with other offices outside of financial aid. It's not just a financial aid audit. There are other offices that are responsible as well to be interviewed and to supply information, and so that was most helpful. And so these are just a few highlights of the information, but one of the main things that we'd requested was an exit conference checklist. So if they could please let us know all the information at the time that they were getting ready to leave of the potential findings that were found and the students that were being identified. And that was most helpful, and they did provide that at the exit conference. And then also, they're not done with their audit, so we were allowed to have a phone conference officially at the end of their audit to have a better understanding of their findings, and that was most beneficial. We had another meeting this year before this upcoming audit, and we were letting them know of all this information that we had requested, and we were hopeful that it was helpful for them as it was for us as institutions, and they agreed that it did run smoothly, and they were happy to continue with that information. And so we were able to then ask for some additional information and making sure that they were treating each school's consistently. You know, if one school is asking for information or told that they can't put this type of wording in their responses, that we would like to be able to do that as well, and to be treated consistently. And so they took that under advisement. We got some clarification on their findings, their classifications. We were talking about, we had requested to have the schools identified as full scope and limited scope. The papers, as this is a public report, don't always pick up on that. They're looking at these final reports and thinking all the schools are having the exact same audit. They did include some language in there to help define that, not only for the public, but also for our presidents that we report to, and let them know, that there are some discrepancies, not as detailed of an audit. Let's see. Those were the highlights. Did y'all have anything to add to that?
A couple of other things that we discussed with the SAO on our conference call was about the how they come up with their formula. Do they expand their population? Do they expand their samples? And they clearly stated to us that they do expand their samples, and they use it from the audit guide based on the findings, and they're required to do either the 25, the 40, or the 60. So they kind of gave us a little guidance on that, and we can provide you that reference because it was very beneficial and helped us understand where they were coming from when they were asking for those extra samples. And we asked them about if they actually review the initial population data before they come to our site, because sometimes when they show up, it's like they're blind, and we've spent all this time and energy and ask other folks to spend all this time and energy getting this stuff prepared for them, and do they actually review it? And actually they do. But they also made it a disclaimer that they were also working at other schools as well, but they are always reviewing our data, always reviewing our population that we do send to them. We also discussed with them about okay, when you leave, you're still contacting us 3 and 4 months later. They indicated that usually their requirements are 14 days after they leave, they should be wrapping up your audit. And that's not necessarily, it's not happening. We came to a conclusion that 30 days was acceptable, and 14 days was just, I've never seen it. So we did have a lot of open discussion with them.
Now, when you say acceptable, does that mean to all parties or just to the institution?
Pretty much to all parties, okay. I would say, because we understand that, with the internet access and the security access, 30 days is pretty general across the board, especially, with the internet security system, guidelines and such. We accepted 30 days.
Can I elaborate on that? And in this reference, we're referring to what they agreed to be reasonable as far as notifying of us of potential findings or things that we hadn't provided, and giving us an opportunity to clarify those findings. Because at one point in the conversation, they said that if the finding wasn't resolved by the time they left your campus, that you wouldn't have an opportunity to resolve it, but they're still notifying us for findings when they leave. So that's where we had to get to clarity on the 30 days. That does not mean, from what I took away from the conversation, that when they go into their QA process, and they have 2 QA processes, an internal QA process and then an external QA process, which the audit goes out to. KPMG has been the contracted firm to date for that. At those points, we may get questions back for clarifications that seem to us things that we've clarified, but our understanding is that's because our members of our audit team have probably moved on to other projects. They're probably down at the DMV or maybe at your institution, if you're not a school by then, looking at something else, and they need, the QA auditors are asking for a specific definition. So it doesn't mean after 30 days we won't get contacted or we're not still engaged with the process. It just means that they will give us 30 days to resolve essentially a finding that we're notified of once they leave our institution.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Another thing that we seem to have an issue with was we seem to always be giving them financial aid 101 or some background on our schools, our recent audits, and so we just asked them, do you have access to last year's audits? And the answer was yes, we do. And one of the things that they are going to reiterate to their teams this year is that this information be reviewed when they show up on site, that the prior year's audit be reviewed, the documentation, the conversations, the definitions, the language, everything be reviewed before they show up on site. So we're not wasting their time and they're not wasting our time in the process. So we'll see how that goes as well. We had, at Texas Tech, we actually had, and I think the other schools did too, we actually had auditors in training, and they were being mentored. And we actually had 2 on site at Texas Tech, and it seemed that some of the questions we were getting shouldn't be asked, and so they are going to get with their auditors in training this year and have them do a certain protocol where they go through their mentor before they come to us, and we're happy to help them and give them the 101 behind the scene, but that's information that we feel that they should have already been aware of. Some things that they kind of shared with us in our conference call. Obviously, the changes in verification, the V4 and V5, the high school diploma, and the evidence and the identification that you're supposed to collect, the wet format, they will be looking at that this year. So heads up on that. They feel that we have done a collaborative effort between the schools and the auditors, that we kind of communicate together, which is different. And we're both on the same page because we're both trying to attain the same goal, and we want to work towards that. They agreed that all of the items were helpful. They will do more coordination in providing us information up front, and on our end, we will communicate with them on things that we think, make it more efficient and more collaborative.
One other item we had pointed out, when they were having a preliminary finding that didn't appear to look correct to us, we were able to talk to them and get them to reword it, perhaps, and we were making sure that that was being consistent as well. Now, they do request that we put in writing those corrections, and then they have to push it up to management, and we were asking who the management was, and they were defining that and letting us know that they would sometimes, review it and come back and then make those corrections or make them more clear. So that was very helpful as well. Then the next thing on the item, wanted to bring up, University of North Texas had a compliance assistant visit by the Department of Education, and when they were on staff, they pointed out that there's going to be a new requirement on the electronic application, starting with our next round of recertifications for schools that are provisionally certified on or after July 1st, 2013. Not only are they going to have to provide a list of the non-degree programs, but they now are going to be required to provide a listing of all the degree programs. And the University of North Texas at Dallas is splitting from UNT, and they are going to be provisional. And so that was one of the requirements that they were going to have to do. And so based on the recommendation from the FAAC chair, we wanted to talk with the coordinating board and see if it would be possible to deliver a report for each Texas school that can be used to meet that requirement. And everybody has a handout. I gave you an example from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board that UNT Dallas received. It showed a listing of all of their schools' programs. And so something like this would be beneficial and helpful for those schools that are requesting by the Department of Education to supply all of their approved degree plans. That's the cover letter, and if you flip, there's an attachment behind it, you'll see the programs that are listed.
Excuse me, when you have one of these reviews, what is the size of the staff that will usually come to your institution to conduct it?
The audit team usually consists of 5 auditors, sometimes 6 with an auditor in training.
Okay.
One thing I'll just throw out a comment. One thing I found interesting, last year, the year before, a question came up that it appeared that what the auditors were saying was in conflict with what the Department of Ed was saying. And it was made very clear that the Department of Ed does not overrule the state auditors. What the auditors say is more accurate than what the Department of Education says.
That is true to a degree, but in where the line is the Department of Education. When we go to a policy and get policy clarification, that's coming directly from the Department of Education. The state auditors, they get their clarification from the OMB and how the OMB sees it. And the OMB, if they're not on the same page with the Department of Education, it ends up in the finding report. Where this becomes kind of entertaining on our side is it sounds really lovely to our college presidents and the press that this is all written up, but we will get phone calls from the Department of Education going, why is this a finding and there's no cost and what is this? One of the things that I think that may be of interest to this group that Shannon alluded to is about the verification and the changes. There is a new audit guide that has been in the works for many years, but it is, I guess, officially going to be published. And the state auditor's office will be auditing under the new guide, I believe, next year. If not, it's the following year. I wasn't really clear on when the official publication date and the new audit guide is. The last time I read the proposals for the new audit guide, it said that anything that a school has corrected prior to an audit can be cited in the audit as a finding, and that's not in the existing A133 guide, but it is in what was originally proposed. Now that may have come out from the last time I read it, but there was a lot of chatter about that, and I never saw them take it out. That is one thing that I find kind of concerning with our state auditors and how they look at our institutions. They have no materiality on common finding threshold. So, for instance, at UT Arlington, we ended up with a material finding that literally was 75 cents for a group of, like 75 cents to $1.50 for a group of 10 students, but it made it material. Because it was a calculation that was off by one day. And so...
But don't they also point out to you areas where you should ask the government for money back? I'm just kidding.
Was that in your report, Tom? Well, we met last time at UT Austin. I don't recall them disclosing that to UT Arlington. So, yes, Marcus, it is frustrating when we are given different guidance from the Department of Education on how they might interpret something versus how our state auditors are interpret something. I think the largest area that we have all really experienced at our institutions, and so other institutions may have an opinion on this because you're not under this audit scrutiny that we are, or it's all being reported, so y'all may not have looked at this, but one of the areas that they look at very different is cost of attendance. And because the state auditor office, unlike a private auditing firm who might come in and audit, they look really heavily at controls. So they're expecting our cost of attendance or our budgets for our students to be 100% accurate at the point of disbursement. That is what they would like to see. Now, we have worked as different institutions to come out with ways to appease them, but a little background for those in the room who don't know what I'm referring to is that when we set, say, a cost of a budget for Susie to attend UT Arlington, and we say, okay, for all her books and her cell phone and all the great things she's going to need to come to this university, we think it's going to be $20,000 for a whole year. If Susie decided, well, today I don't want to be in nursing, I want to be in engineering, and engineering happens to cost $100 more in tuition and fees than nursing did, the budget that I built and awarded Susie on is no longer correct, because it should have been $20,100. And for those of us who do things heavily in volume in advance, this has become a challenge for us, as well as attendance. And I'm sure that many of you know that conversation. So if you have
and that's an issue whether or not the student was awarded full need.
Well, that's why the Department of Ed kind of laughs when they read this finding, because it didn't change the student's eligibility. That most of us cannot award our students up to our cost of attendance. This maybe community colleges could be better. This might be where it would be more of an impact. But at a four-year institution in this state, for the majority of us, unless there's something unique about the program or the student, the majority of us can't meet the full need of the student. It wouldn't have changed and been at the budget. So it changes nothing in the award. It changes nothing that we could have done for the student, but yet you didn't give the student the right budget.
And when you asked the Department of Education about this type of interpretation, I was told to build a better relationship with the state auditor. So, FYI, that was the advice that I got from the Department
of Ed. And Lisa knows, and many other people up on the panel, as we go to conferences and talk to our colleagues in other states, the word that comes to mind is the ridiculousness. Is kind of what the response is. And again, because the state auditor is looking at it very siloed, and they're looking at this is what it says in the controls, that you're supposed to have controls in place to give the student the right budget. It's not looking at the student holistically and saying, was the need of the student met? Did you over or under award the student? And so one of the examples that Chrisana used into where we were have become more flexible in our response language to the findings that we do have is I think we're all very clear now when we clarify a finding to say that it did not change the student's need or would not have changed their award.
And to build a relationship, we have invited the state auditor's office to present at TASFA, and that's been very beneficial. They've done that the last 2 years, and we hope to continue that relationship. They're able to come in and share and kind of show their sides, their timelines, what they're looking for, point out new areas of that they're going to be auditing, and that has really helped our relationship. We, are able to talk to them, ask them questions in a non-threatening environment, and we hope to continue that relationship. And then being able to have these conference calls with them, we hope to continue that as well. We want to make sure that we're making the point that we do appreciate their time, that they are listening to our concerns and our recommendations to improve the process, not only for the schools, but also for their audits teams, and because they have a very strict timeline in what they're working on. And so far it has been a very good relationship. And so this group has really worked well to come together to try to represent all the schools in the state of Texas that are participating in the A133 audit.
Well, and we're all benefiting from that relationship. So thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
One issue I think you folks have talked about within your group is whether or not there might be any possibility of the state auditor's office revising its schedule so that these audits are not so don't get conducted in the summer months when we're all at peak in terms of trying to serve our customers. And I haven't tracked that. Have you been able to raise that at all with them, and about whether or not the management in the auditor's office might be willing to at least reconsider that schedule?
Well, we haven't come back exactly asking for the summer not to be utilized by their audit team. However, we do point out that we have NASFA conferences during that time, and they were willing to work around that. And if there were issues that come up, I know this year our institution asked to push our audit back to September, and they were willing to do that. Oh. So you can, talk to them about that and see individually. I know, though, that they have a time frame, and they're trying. This is when they start, and they've got it to meet their time frame. They have to start in the summertime.
I think, Tom, it would be beneficial. I think if the schools went, especially the 8 collectively, if we had a suggestion of a time. The last comments they made regarding this were, it was very conflicting feedback that they got. They used to not do it in the summer. Then everybody said, well, these times aren't conducive for us. But with there being 8 of us that are being repeatedly having this experience, I think if there were a time of the year that the 8 of us could say, okay, this is better, they would be open to hearing that. One thing that they were not open to that was suggested was that maybe they could ask for or test different populations throughout the year. So instead of having everything done in the summer all together, that maybe they could test different parts of the population throughout the year, or not even the population, they could, different controls, those kinds of things. Right. Their feedback was, because if they were a firm that only did financial aid audits and that's all they did, that might work. But since next week they're at the DMV or the Health and Human Services, because of their other audit schedules and the other organizations that they have to audit, and we don't have exclusive teams, that didn't work with their scheduling.
Okay. Thank you.
But if you would send us the dates that would work best for your institution, we can collectively get that together and try to present that the next time that we talk to them for the following audit. I think that's a great idea.
We were thinking about December 26th to 31st. But, just a thought.
So you want to come in and work during the Christmas holidays?
Oh, well, yeah. We'll give them to our skeleton crew, and they'll see just how thin we are.
I see.
If I'm there, I can't make that case.
Are there any other questions for us?
Was there a request about the report?
Yes.
Okay. Is that still?
That's what's up on the screen now. It's kind of sideways. But this is the sample of the University of North Texas at Dallas list that was provided by the coordinating board to meet the requirement by the Department of Education for the electronic application that's listing all of their programs. And you should have a handout that was passed out earlier for those that are here.
Okay.
Is this something that the coordinating board would be willing to work with schools that are provisional that would require this list? Great.
That's not from our department, but I would think the coordinating board would be quite willing to do that.
Okay.
Because, I mean, this information is on file here. I mean,
Yeah.
if not, we shouldn't be offering it.
Exactly.
The program, that is. Okay.
And the list looks similar to this. You would be entering the zip code and the program information on the electronic application. It's actually under Section E27 of the electronic application. And so that's going to be coming up at our next recertification if the schools are found provisionally certified after July 1st of 2013. And so the schools would then be able to contact, would it be Rex Peebles? Is that the contact person? So schools that find themselves needing this information, that would be their contact. Great. Thank you.
More thoughts, comments? Sorry.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say that the communications between the auditors and institutions have strengthened tremendously as a result of this group, and these three need to be commended as leaders of the group. They've done an excellent job.
Thank you.
Well, something that I've seen is the larger schools have some benefits by being able to hire or staff a position that deals just with this, but yet every school across the country, let's go to at least within the state, has those same requirements that we have to meet too. And it can be very, very, very challenging if you don't have someone whose really main responsibility is keeping up with that, because the stuff is changing constantly. And some of it can be open to interpretation. So with the relationship building, I'm going to assume that shouldn't involve gift baskets, things like that. Okay.
No, they wouldn't attend our task for dinner.
Yeah, we invited them and they
So
wouldn't
I'm
attend.
going to think that no gift baskets would be appropriate.
Okay.
We asked
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Anything else? We
I do
appreciate
have
it.
just one more comment. I found the reference that Tanya was referring to on the, it's the OMB 2 CFR 200, and it indicates here that the Department of Ed should be adding to their information in 2015, and then the State Auditor's Office will be following the audit requirements in this guide in 2016.
Wow.
Here we go again.
Yeah, OMB CFR 200.
And can you repeat that one more time, Shannon?
OMB-2 CFR 200.
And I just had an institution email responding to your comment of what time would be best for them for an audit, and they said September would be much better for their institution.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? Or
Thank you for coming.
thank you for having us. We,
Yes,
we
thank
appreciate
you.
the opportunity.
Okay. Last thing on our list that's on the list, discussion of the CBID pilot project and designating an institution master. And I have no idea who's doing this or what it's about. Oh, okay. And Sophia, you always have good news for us, so we're excited.
There we go. This is enhanced security for student data. This is something that's coming soon, so it's just to let you guys all know. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board is implementing new security procedures or improving security procedures for several of our web-based programs. This is going to be affecting the award history screen and also the fund request webpage. The new security process will require an assignment of a dedicated personnel at the institution to work and act as a liaison with the coordinating board to manage all authorized users at the institution. Each user's access will be managed both by the liaison and the coordinating board. And the coordinating board will assume that the financial aid director would be the institutional liaison. And unless we receive something in writing where you can provide us a contact at your institution that will work on your behalf, The liaison will receive the initial training, and then once implemented, the previous ID and passwords will be invalid. And this is coming soon, so we just wanted to get feedback, making sure that financial aid directors would be a good contact for liaison for the grants and special program, or if you already know that you would not be a good contact for the grants and special programs, and that a grant manager or a scholarship manager would be the ideal contact. Yeah.
With the directors.
Would you clarify what you mean by award history? Is that the exchange of information that you're
For
talking
private
about?
schools, there's not a current screen that you have. For public schools, they have the ability to submit those 5 records and look for 5 students at a time. The new upcoming award history file is going to be submitted securely, and then the results will be sent securely, so that's not going to be affected. This is more of the web-based, where you log in and then just look for information.
Onesie, twosies.
Yeah, but for private schools right now, you have to log in to submit a fund request for TEG funds, and then the same for Texas Grant and TEOG funds. That will be affected. So even though you may not use the award screen as you have in the past because of the upcoming file, you still have to submit your fund requests through this online web-based process. And there will be new IDs and passwords, a new process protocol. And we just wanted to make sure that we felt that the financial aid directors would be the correct contact to be the liaison, to work with the coordinating board, to identify the actual staff that is going to be using the web-based programs. But if you're not, we would want that in writing. And is that all okay? Or
Sophia, in the context of the funds request forms, business officers might be involved and so forth. Would the financial aid office manager also be over the assignment of passwords to those kind of people?
Right. So, yes, the liaison would kind of manage the institutional staff users. So if someone leaves or is no longer working there, they can delete their registration and so on and so forth.
Does that create a conflict of interest in any way?
No, it's individualized IDs and passwords, so there isn't a conflict of interest. And because there's that liaison, then you have that kind of control and oversight, and it's not on us. So.
But asking the director to appoint someone is appropriate. Assuming it's going to be the director is probably not.
So you're saying, let me be clear, you're saying that I'm assuming that it's the director, and that's not the appropriate, but
no, and asking me who'll do it is fine, but I'm not going to be the right person to do that. So
right.
Having me designate someone is the right thing.
Yes, we want to make sure we get it from the financial aid office, the director. If you don't want to do it, that's okay. Let us know who, and then we'll work with that person, and they will handle it.
I really want to do it.
Oh yeah.
Well, we tend to be a pretty unreliable group. Is really what he's saying.
Too many vacations.
No, that's not it.
My last name is Rodriguez. I'm sorry, there was a name. Okay, good.
With Department of Ed, we have destination point administrators who get the access. And then we also have a secondary destination administrator, so that in our instance, I'm the designated person that does all of the access for Department of Ed access. But then the director is the secondary, so that if anything happened to me, he could still go in and be able to change things for our institution. And I think that's a real good setup, or it's worked very well for us with turnover and people coming and going, to have 2 people designated, one is primary, one is secondary, so that way if either one of those people leave, you still have somebody else that can do what needs to be done so the institution can function.
I'll have to talk to my IT right now. There's one primary would be the institutional staff, and then the secondary would be the coordinating board staff. So that's the way.
But you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
If the designee leaves, then who's going to handle that for the school?
Right. Then we would take over, talk to whoever's interim, and then work with that interim to assign another liaison person, but we would take over. We would have the same controls as you do. So if someone leaves, they just call us and we've got it. But I think that's a great suggestion, and I'll take that up with my IT staff to see if there could be 2 liaisons at each institution to be backup for one another. That's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Any other questions?
What's the timeline? What is the timeline?
The timeline is coming soon. That's all I've been authorized to say.
Okay.
You're honest to a fault.
Yeah.
Actually, probably honest to several faults, but that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all on our agenda. Are there other items that we need to discuss?
If anyone has an agenda item for the next meeting or a proposed date or timeline for next meeting, that'd be good.
Suggested date is the 3rd week of September, and I'm not sure whether that would be considered the 16th or the 23rd.
It's usually the same week as my birthday, which would be the 23rd. But just in the past, it's usually been the same week as my birthday.
Is that a problem, or is that a...
That's fine.
And which one of those dates would that be? The week of yours?
My birthday's the 26th.
Okay.
Okay, are we looking at?
Now,
Just not the last week of September.
in the last week, there's like 4 days in it, or is it the last full week?
I will be gone the week that is the bridge week between September and October.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the week after that is when we have tasks.
So September 16th is a tentative date?
Agenda item, maximums for TEOG and Texas grant. Resolve and write, whatever. So if we can find out ahead of time what we can do, that'd be great.
Can you say number of hours, years?
Whatever,
that
yeah,
stuff?
whatever we talked
Okay.
about earlier, we need to,
Yeah,
the amendment the motion that I made earlier, if we can find out some information ahead of time to make sure that we can do it, which I think we can, then I think that should be like one of our number 1 priorities, because we're already heading into planning for 15, 16 at that point. So, and we're also getting ready for the transition from TEOG to Texas Grant for the spring. So we need to be ready to go, and I would imagine on your all's end, there's going to have to be some programming involved in that that's going to be tied to what we talked about
And you
earlier.
could have a student receiving a Texas
Yes.
grant via that avenue beginning this upcoming spring.
Yes,
So that's
we
why
need
it's
to-
important
we need
that
to
it
know
be
so
put
that
in
we can
place.
set what needs to happen on our systems for that. So I think we need to set that definition and get it done. Get her done the next meeting.
Marcus, when do terms expire? I know we all have a year, but is that at the end of the summer? the
I
end of the
believe
calendar year, or
it's
what?
October.
the September meeting.
It should be indicated on here, and yes, it's the October of that year that's
October.
listed.
Okay.
So Marcus has to do one more meeting before I start? Sweet.
Yeah, the idea was that the committee year begins with the meeting right after TASFA.
Okay. You got to do another
So
meeting.
unless we postpone. Sweet. Do you need, or do you have the list of action items, or?
A list of action items would be helpful.
My hope was that you had them.
Well, the main one,
The one that Lisa already brought up.
right. The one. Well, we have the one that was the. It was a motion and it was carried.
Okay.
That's
Our
one.
discussion then on the BOT on the 3-year default rate.
The use of a 3-year default rate, right.
Are we going to do something regarding the literacy pilot program, kind of asking that it become broader, fully adopted, that type thing?
Did we need to, on the be on time though, did we talk about whether we need to decide on whether how did we decide that TG, we're going to look at TG's model? Is
We're
that what
going to
we're
work
do?
with TG.
So probably a follow-up on that at the next meeting would be appropriate, right?
You want to, would you like someone to come in and give you like an overview of what we have?
I think that would be great.
We can do that.
I'm hoping that we can get with you even before
Before that?
then. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
At that point, hopefully we'll have some information on whether the exceptional items were all approved and funded. Okay.
By that point in time, we may know what
That was
the
a huge
exceptional
sigh.
items were.
Okay. I don't see anything else.
Marcus, what about the data that we were asking for about the programs that may be potentially cut or reduced? When can we expect that data?
You're talking about the top 10?
The top 10.
We'll look at it as soon as we can. The issue, one of the problems that we may have is that the automatic admission, which came in about the same time as a top 10 scholarship, how do you discern whether it was a scholarship or the automatic admission that causes someone to stay in the state of Texas? But we'll pull what data we have and see what we can find out.
Anything else?
Is that a time when we should probably talk about anything we need to prepare for the legislative session? Because will we have another meeting before then? Legislative session starts in January. I'm just just to kind of have something on the agenda to preliminarily talk about what are some of those things that are going to pop up that we know of. What do we want to be prepared to testify on? Because we serve as experts in the state, so we probably should think about what do we want to testify on, like what George was talking about, just preparing, even though we haven't completely implemented the pilot, we need to talk about that. What are some other things that we know we need to be prepared so that some of us can start talking to staffs and be ready for that? I think that's a good time to get ready for that.
I can write something up and get it to you to look at. Just
Have a list of things that we probably need to.
Well, if we have the opportunity to discuss what came up earlier, that these programs have been cut over the years, and if we do have some surplus, now's the time to get them back funded for the purpose in which they were initially put in place. So anyway, 2 cents there. Anything else? Jane, thank you for the brownies. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And with that, motion to adjourn accepted.
Motion. Second.
Thank you again.
I had asked to meet with the public university folk briefly, if you have a few moments. Yep. Thank you. 4 years.